Claire and Ethan had been looking forward to their getaway for months. Life in the city had become overwhelming, and they needed a break. When they found the cabin online, nestled deep in the woods with a stunning view of a serene lake, it seemed like the perfect retreat. The pictures showed a charming, rustic cabin with large windows that framed the water, and they couldn't wait to spend a peaceful week reconnecting with nature. The drive was long, winding through dense forests, the road narrowing as they got closer to their destination. By the time they arrived, the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the lake. The cabin was just as beautiful as it had looked in the pictures, perhaps even more so in the fading light. Claire and Ethan unloaded their bags, eager to start their vacation. The cabin was cozy and well-kept, with a stone fireplace, wooden floors, and large windows offering a breathtaking view of the lake. The air was fresh, the silence broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves or the distant call of a loon. It felt like a slice of paradise, a perfect escape from the hustle and bustle of their everyday lives. That night, they lit a fire in the fireplace and made dinner together, enjoying the tranquility of their surroundings. Afterward, they sat on the porch, watching the stars reflect off the still water. It was so peaceful that they found themselves lulled into a deep sense of relaxation. As they prepared for bed, Claire noticed something strange. The cabin, which had been warm and inviting, suddenly felt cold, as if a chill had settled over it. The air felt thick, heavy with an unexplained sense of unease. She mentioned it to Ethan, but he dismissed it as the cold night air. Still, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. In the middle of the night, Claire was jolted awake by a loud thud. It sounded like something heavy had fallen in the living room. Heart pounding, she nudged Ethan awake. They both listened in the darkness, but the cabin was silent again, except for the crackling of the dying fire. Convinced it was nothing, they eventually drifted back to sleep. The next morning, they found the living room in disarray. A chair had been overturned, and a picture frame lay shattered on the floor. Ethan frowned, but they both tried to brush it off as the result of the cabin settling or a gust of wind they hadn't noticed. But the unsettling events didn't stop. As the day went on, more strange occurrences started to happen. Doors would slam shut on their own, objects would move when no one was looking, and cold spots would appear in random places throughout the cabin. The once peaceful atmosphere had turned oppressive, as if the cabin itself had a malevolent presence lurking within its walls. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the lake, Claire found an old journal tucked away in a drawer. The pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with frantic, illegible handwriting. As she skimmed through it, she realized it belonged to the cabin's previous owner, a man who had lived there alone many years ago. The final entries were increasingly erratic, describing strange noises, terrifying visions, and an overwhelming sense of dread that had consumed him. The last entry was the most disturbing. It spoke of a spirit, bound to the lake and the cabin, that demanded sacrifice. The man wrote of his intention to leave, but the entry abruptly ended, as if he had never had the chance to escape. Claire showed the journal to Ethan, and they both felt a growing sense of horror. They tried to rationalize it, but the events of the past day had them both on edge. They agreed to leave the next morning, determined to get away from whatever evil lingered in the cabin. That night, the terror escalated. As they lay in bed, the temperature in the room plummeted, their breath visible in the freezing air. Suddenly, the windows rattled violently, as if something was trying to break in. Then came the whispers, faint at first, but growing louder and more insistent. They were incomprehensible, but filled with malice, echoing through the cabin like the voices of the damned. Ethan jumped out of bed to check the windows, but as soon as he did, the bedroom door slammed shut, trapping Claire inside. She screamed as the whispers grew deafening, and the room filled with a dark, oppressive force that seemed to press down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Ethan pounded on the door, trying to force it open, but it wouldn't budge. Just as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. The door flew open, and Ethan rushed in to find Claire pale and trembling. They decided then and there to leave immediately. They grabbed their bags and ran to the car, but when Ethan tried to start it, the engine wouldn't turn over. The car was dead, just like the air around them, thick with an unnatural silence. Desperate, they ran back into the cabin to find another way out. But as they entered, the door slammed shut behind them, and the lights flickered out, plunging them into darkness. The whispers returned, louder than ever, and the shadows in the room seemed to move with a life of their own, reaching out toward them with cold, invisible hands. Claire and Ethan huddled together, terrified, as the spirit began to manifest. A dark figure, barely more than a shadow, emerged from the corner of the room. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and its presence filled the cabin with a suffocating dread. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, and the figure advanced on them, its form twisting and contorting as it approached. In a moment of clarity, Claire remembered the journal's mention of the lake and the spirit's connection to it. She grabbed the journal and frantically flipped through the pages, searching for something that could help them. In the final pages, she found a passage about the spirit's origin, a restless soul tied to the waters of the lake, bound to the cabin by a curse. With no other options, Claire and Ethan ran out of the cabin, heading for the lake. The spirit followed, its presence pressing down on them, driving them toward the water. When they reached the shore, Claire tore out the last page of the journal and, with a desperate prayer, threw it into the lake. For a moment, nothing happened. The air was still, and the spirit loomed over them, its malevolent gaze fixed on Claire. But then, the lake's surface began to ripple, and a sudden, powerful gust of wind swept across the water, pulling the spirit toward the lake. It fought against the pull, but the force was too strong. With a final, agonized scream, the spirit was dragged into the depths of the lake, disappearing beneath the surface. The wind died down, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The cabin behind them was silent, its windows dark. Claire and Ethan, exhausted and shaken, made their way back to the cabin to gather their things. The car, which had refused to start earlier, roared to life as they turned the key. Claire and Ethan drove in silence, the events at the cabin still fresh in their minds. The sun had already begun to set as they made their way back to the city, but the sense of relief they had expected never came. Instead, an unsettling feeling settled over them, like a dark cloud they couldn't shake. The forest around them seemed to close in as the narrow road wound through the dense trees. As the night deepened, the eerie silence in the car became oppressive. Claire tried to distract herself by looking out the window, but her thoughts kept returning to the malevolent spirit they had encountered at the cabin. She shivered, rubbing her arms as if to chase away the cold that had settled in her bones. Ethan, too, felt uneasy. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white, as he fought to keep his eyes on the road. But something kept drawing his gaze to the rearview mirror, where he caught fleeting glimpses of movement in the back seat. At first, he dismissed it as a trick of the light, but then he saw it clearly, a shadowy figure sitting in the back seat, its eyes glowing with the same malevolent light they had seen at the lake. "Claire," Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. "Don't look, but I think it's in the car." Claire's breath caught in her throat as she slowly turned her head, her eyes meeting Ethan's in the mirror. Her heart sank as she saw it too, the same dark figure, its twisted form filling the back seat, staring at them with an intensity that sent shivers down her spine. The spirit hadn't been defeated at the lake. It had followed them, hitching a ride in their car, and it wasn't going to let them go. Realizing they couldn't make it home in one night, they decided to stop at a small roadside hotel. The parking lot was mostly empty, the neon sign flickering dimly as they pulled in. Ethan parked the car near the entrance, both of them too terrified to look back as they quickly grabbed their bags and hurried inside. Once in their room, Claire and Ethan bolted the door, their nerves frayed. They glanced out the window, and to their horror, they saw the spirit sitting in their car, its glowing eyes fixed on them through the glass. It didn't move, just sat there, watching, waiting. They tried to sleep, but the room felt unnaturally cold, and the oppressive atmosphere from the cabin seemed to have followed them. Every noise, every creak of the building made them jump, their senses on high alert. They could feel the spirit's presence even though it wasn't in the room, a cold, dark energy pressing in on them from all sides. Suddenly, Claire felt a sharp pain in her hand. She gasped and looked down to see deep, red scratches forming on her skin as if an invisible hand was clawing at her. Ethan rushed to her side, but as soon as he touched her, the same scratches appeared on his own hand. They recoiled in terror, realizing that the spirit was in the room with them, unseen but very much present. The scratching continued, each cut more painful than the last, until the couple was left trembling in fear, clutching each other for support. The spirit's malevolent energy filled the room, suffocating them with its rage. Morning couldn't come soon enough. As soon as the first light of dawn broke, Claire and Ethan grabbed their bags and fled the hotel, not daring to look back at the car until they were safely inside. The spirit was no longer visible, but they could feel its presence, lurking, waiting for its next chance to strike. The rest of the drive home was a blur of anxiety and dread. They spoke little, each of them lost in their own thoughts, trying to figure out how to escape this nightmare. When they finally reached their house, it felt less like a sanctuary and more like a trap. They unpacked in a daze, the house feeling strange and unfamiliar, as if the spirit had already taken root in its walls. Every shadow seemed to move, every creak of the floorboard sounded like footsteps. It wasn't long before they realized the spirit had followed them home. Desperate for help, Claire and Ethan contacted a local priest, Father O'Malley, known for his work in exorcisms and dealing with malevolent spirits. He agreed to come to their house immediately, sensing the urgency in their voices. When Father O'Malley arrived, he could feel the dark energy permeating the house. The air was thick with it, a tangible malevolence that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He prepared for the ritual, setting up candles and holy water, and began to pray. But the spirit was strong, far stronger than Father O'Malley had anticipated. As he started the exorcism, the spirit manifested with a fury, throwing objects across the room, slamming doors, and causing the walls to shake. The air grew frigid, and the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. The spirit attacked, targeting the priest and the couple, clawing at them with invisible hands, leaving deep, bloody scratches on their skin. Father O'Malley faltered, struggling to maintain his focus as the spirit's power grew. It was unlike anything he had ever faced before, an ancient, vengeful force that had fed on the fear and pain of countless victims. Claire and Ethan huddled together, their hope waning as they watched the priest battle the spirit. The atmosphere in the room was suffocating, the spirit's anger a palpable force that threatened to crush them. But Father O'Malley refused to give up. Summoning every ounce of his strength and faith, he pressed on, reciting the prayers louder, more forcefully. He sprinkled holy water around the room, the droplets hissing as they touched the spirit's form, causing it to writhe and scream in agony. Slowly, the spirit began to weaken. Its form flickered, becoming less solid, more translucent. The temperature in the room started to rise, the oppressive atmosphere lifting slightly as Father O'Malley's prayers took effect. With one final, desperate cry, the spirit lunged at Claire and Ethan, but Father O'Malley stepped between them, holding up his crucifix. The spirit recoiled, its form disintegrating into a dark, swirling mist. The mist was pulled toward the crucifix, where it was absorbed into the holy symbol, leaving behind only silence. The house was still, the air clear and calm. The dark presence that had haunted them was gone, banished by the priest's unwavering faith. Claire and Ethan collapsed into each other's arms, tears of relief streaming down their faces. They were safe, finally free from the spirit's grip. Father O'Malley stayed with them for a while, ensuring that the house was cleansed of any remaining traces of the spirit. He blessed every room, leaving them with instructions on how to keep their home spiritually protected. As the priest left, Claire and Ethan felt a sense of peace they hadn't experienced since before the cabin. The spirit was gone, but the scars, both physical and emotional, would take time to heal. They knew they had narrowly escaped a fate far worse than they could have imagined, and they would never take their safety or each other for granted again. Their home, once again, became a place of warmth and love, but they would always remember the terrifying ordeal they had survived. The cabin by the lake was far behind them, but its dark history would remain a part of their lives, a cautionary tale of the dangers that lurk in the shadows, waiting to strike. For now, they were safe, but the memory of the spirit's malevolent gaze would haunt their dreams for years to come.